EDGAR CAYCE. The Lord's Prayer. Part 2. Meditation and the Mind of Man. Chapter 3. By Herbert B. Puryear and Mark Thurston. The readings suggest that the Lord's Prayer describes the proper movement of energy in meditation. This prayer can be used as a tool for the mind to ensure that this optimum condition is achieved. In the following passage from the readings we find the suggestion that the Lord's Prayer was given by Jesus specifically to relate to the opening of the spiritual centers. Does the outline of the Lord's Prayer, as placed on our chart, have any bearing on the opening of the centers? Here is indicated the manner in which it was given as to the purpose for which it was given, not as an only way, but as a way that would answer for those that sought to be, as others, seekers for a way, and understanding, to the relationships to the creative forces. It bears in relationships to this, then, the proper place. How should the Lord's Prayer be used in this connection? As in feeling, as it were, the flow of the meanings of each portion of same throughout the body physical. For as there is the response to the mental representations of all of these in the mental body, it may build into the physical body in the manner as He, thy Lord, thy brother, so well expressed in, I have bread ye know not of. The second answer, in telling us how to use this prayer, suggests that as we focus our consciousness upon the prayer there is a response from a deep level of the mind, the response to the mental representations of all of these in the mental body. This response from a deeper level of the mind is accompanied by a physiological response. There is an attunement that opens the flow of a more profound level of energy within us. I have bread ye know not of. This principle holds true whether we are focusing upon the Lord's Prayer or some other affirmation that contains our ideal for spiritual growth. In the first answer above, a reference is made to a chart. In that chart the people asking the question had placed portions of the Lord's Prayer in relation to the various spiritual centers. The reading indicates that they had properly assigned these relationships. The chart looked much like this. Our Father which art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation. But deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory forever. Amen. Can knowing this relationship between the spiritual centers and the various parts of the Lord's Prayer help us to use the prayer more effectively? If we look at it as a specific prayer of attunement, there is a way in which we can use it at the beginning of each meditation period before we begin to work with the specific affirmation. This method will be helpful in the whole process of attunement that we seek in meditation. We want to feel the meaning of each portion of the prayer, the meaning it has within the mind and within the body. The chart suggests that each phrase relates to qualities similar to those focused in each of the spiritual centers. Our Father, who art in heaven, is directed to the Pituitary Center, and can be used to awaken the awareness of oneness. We might relate this to the concept of one God, or the oneness of the Father. As we say, Hallowed be thy name, we should feel the presence of the Christ mind within us. We can see this relationship if we think about how the following terms go together: name, word, the Word made flesh, the light, the Christ. That part of the Godhead that is represented in the Trinity, as the Christ has its point of contact in the body in the Pineal Center. As we say this part of the prayer, we want to get a sense of the presence of Christ within. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, is directed to the Thyroid Center, and is appropriate to awaken a consciousness of the obedient will. So we can see that the Lord's Prayer begins by addressing the upper three centers, affirming the supremacy of God within ourselves. We might think of the next section of the Lord's Prayer, which addresses the lower centers, as a bypass prayer. As the energy, the daily bread, rises, we are interested in bypassing the confusing or destructive patterns associated with the lower centers. Some schools of thought talk about awakening and mastering the spiritual centers sequentially, like rungs on a ladder. If that kind of awakening means that we have to deal step by step with all the memory patterns stored at these lower levels, then it may take us a long time to get the energy moved to the higher three centers. Such a way will be fraught with many snares. For example, imagine that you are sitting quietly in meditation, and the Adrenal Center begins to awaken. Suppose you had to become aware of all the memory patterns you have stored concerning anger, fear and resentment. If you had to deal with all of them and work your way through them before the Thymus Center could awaken, the progress would be very, very slow. Clearly it would be better if we could move directly from the gonads, cells of Leydig complex to the pineal and pituitary centers. This is not to suggest that we are not responsible for the things that we have built into the spiritual centers in between. Certainly we are responsible for those patterns. But the question is, how do we want to work on healing? Do we want to fight our negative patterns at their own level, and be there a long time? Or do we want to move to a higher level of awareness and energy, and from that level begin to deal with them through the power of the Spirit of Christ? Patterns related to the earth must invariably win if they are fought at their own level. But we have the alternative of awakening this spiritual energy, to which we have greater access in meditation, and letting it move directly to the higher centers. There it will take on a vibrational quality that is in accord with the Christ and the principle of oneness. Then the energy can move back down and heal the patterns of the lower centers. This is referred to by some Chinese schools of meditation as the circulation of the light. The truth of these concepts will become experienced by all of us as we continue to work with meditation. As we are sitting still, dwelling upon an affirmation, it is likely that some memory will be awakened. An image or thought will come to mind, or our thoughts may simply drift off. What could be happening is that a memory pattern associated with one of the lower centers is asking for attention. What do we want to do at that moment? Dwell on the thought. Try to solve the problem at its own level. Or do we want to let go of it, move to a higher perspective and have it healed? If we choose the latter alternative, energy flows back down and cleanses the lower centers. As this happens, we may not realize what patterns are being healed, but undoubtedly we will see changes in our daily life confirming this healing. And so the Lord's Prayer begins by addressing the higher centers, and then speaks to the lower centers. In essence, the message directed to the lower centers is: as the energy awakens, let it move through each of you without awakening patterns that are out of harmony with the ideal. First, the prayer addresses the gonads, which have been described as a motor or generator of the body. It says, "Give us this day our daily bread." Thus, with this phrase we are requesting access in this meditation, or this day, to only that amount of energy that we can use constructively, no more than that. We might remember the story of the Israelites in the desert and the way in which they received their daily food, manna. Each morning they were to collect only the amount that was needed for that day, any excess would spoil on them. In the Lord's Prayer we are seeking that there may be awakened only that energy, which is needed now to do the things we need to do. Next, the prayer addresses the solar plexus, or adrenal centers. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Here we want to focus on the quality of forgiveness. When we can do this, the energy is able to move on and not get caught up in the awakening of old patterns of fear or resentment. Certainly, we are going to deal with them later, as the energy flows down. Then the prayer moves on and addresses the cells of Leydig with the words, "Lead us not into temptation." That is to say, do not allow the energy to dwell here and awaken the patterns at this level. The constant temptation is to look at life in terms of duality instead of oneness, to think of God as being apart from us. The cells of Leydig center has especially to do with this sense of division, which is reflected in the male-female polarity. As we bring an ideal into our work of balancing the male and female energies within us, we experience underlying oneness. So here we can focus on and feel that presence within, which leads us and directs us. And finally, the prayer addresses the Thymus Center, saying, "Deliver us from evil." Again, the idea expressed here is do not allow the energy to awaken the patterns at this level. If we think of evil as the lack of love, then we can see the relationship between these words and the Thymus Center. We are speaking to the center and asking that the energy pass through and not awaken patterns associated with memories of our failure to love truly. The prayer ends by affirming again the triune Godhead within. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory forever. In saying this prayer and feeling its meaning, we are moving toward the optimum physical conditions for meditation. Physiology of Meditation. 3 Correlate Systems. Cerebrospinal System. Autonomic System. Endocrine System. A closer look at the spiritual centers. The Gonad Center. The cells of Leydig Center. The Adrenal Center. The Thymus Center. The Thyroid Center. The Pineal Center. The Pituitary Center. The 2 primary functions of the centers as transducers. Spiritual aspect of our being as light. Opening the centers. The center works to control the flow of energy. The movement of energy in meditation. One of the most important insights to be gained from EDGAR CAYCE readings on meditation is that it is not just spiritual exercise. Meditation involves the body and the mind as well. Here we shall examine some specific events that take place in the body as we enter into deep meditation. A problem that has perplexed philosophers and theologians for hundreds of years can be stated as follows. If there is, in fact, an infinite spiritual dimension to our being, how is it able to contact or affect our finite physical nature? Another way of phrasing this question might be, where does the life force or the divine force touch the body? Or, how does the soul interact with the body? It is interesting to consider from a historical perspective where man has thought life is located. At some periods he has felt that life is in the heart. At other times, in the liver. In our day the tendency is to think of life as being in the head, or the cortex of the brain. However, a very important concept from the readings is that life touches the body in every cell. We are trying to awaken in meditation an awareness of the life force that is going to affect the entire body, not just the thoughts in the brain. To answer the question of how the infinite is able to affect the finite, the readings begin with the concept that the body is the temple, not only in the sense of a temple as a place, but also as an edifice specially constructed for optimally fulfilling a specific function. The readings on meditation reveal an exciting and beautiful picture of the way in which man is purposefully constructed to enable him to be a companion with God in awareness, knowledge and energy. The human body is potentially a very special kind of instrument that provides distinct channels for tuning into the infinite energy and enabling it to express itself in the material world. In the following 2 readings, we find reference to the way in which the body responds in deep meditation. There are definite conditions that arise from within the inner man when an individual enters into true or deep meditation. A physical condition happens. A physical activity takes place. Acting through what? through that man has chosen to call the imaginative or the impulsive. There are physical contacts which the anatomist finds not, or those who would look for imaginations or the minds. Yet it is found that within the body there are channels, there are ducts, there are glands, there are activities that perform no one knows what, in a living, moving, thinking being. The physical contacts and glands referred to here are the endocrine system. Physiologists note that the glands are the miracle workers of the body. We know them personally to be closely related to our emotions. For example, the adrenals relate to anger. The readings are saying that when the endocrine glands become properly attuned, they become spiritual centers and points of contact through which energy and information can flow from God to man. A word that describes the way in which these glands, or spiritual centers function, is transduction. This is not a word that Edgar Cayce used, but it seems to be an effective one for summarizing the concept that is in the readings. It is a word that is frequently used by physiologists. A transducer is a device that takes energy from one system and provides energy in a different form to another system. For example, a telephone is a transducer. It takes electrical energy and transforms it into sound waves. Let us now look at this definition in terms of the two primary systems of our own being, our infinite nature and our finite nature. We could illustrate the concept of transducers in the following way. The readings suggest that there are 7 very special contact points, or transducers, within the body that have an important relationship to our spiritual nature. Where are those transducers and what are they? They have been talked about for 1,000 years. In the East they are called the chakras. In the Edgar Cayce readings they are referred to as spiritual centers. Many people who are consciously psychic claim to be able to see things that are not visible to the normal person's eye. They say that they can see energy patterns, or vortices of energy, that touch the body in 7 places. There seems to be a general agreement among various people as to where these points of contact are. In the forehead, at the top of the head, in the throat region, in the area of the heart, at the solar plexus, in the lower abdomen, and in the groin area, or at the base of the spine. Sometimes these centers have been drawn in the East as touching the spine, running from its base up to the top of the head. The information in Edgar Cayce's readings about the spiritual centers most frequently refers to them in terms of the endocrine glands. There is one endocrine gland for each of the spiritual centers. We can imagine the endocrine system to be a set of 7 fabulous jewels of different colors. That system is primarily composed of the following 7 centers: pituitary, pineal, thyroid, thymus, adrenal, cells of Leydig, and gonads. The functioning of these ductless glands, secreting their numerous hormones directly into the bloodstream, is unimaginably complex. We can visualize this system as being like a symphony orchestra. Properly attuned and functioning in a harmonious and integrated way as a single system, it produces magnificent music, a hymn of the universe that lifts us from the finite into attunement with the infinite. Or, think of this system as being like a 7-piece band. 1 or 2 instruments may step forward and solo while the others continue to play in the background. On occasion, one of the players may hog the show and usurp the role of the others. In our consideration of the spiritual centers, you must remember that the center itself is more than just the endocrine gland. For each center there is also a gathering of nerves in the area, called a plexus, and we might think of the plexus as being a part of the overall activity that makes up the spiritual center. For example, with the thymus there is also the cardiac plexus, the heart as the heart center, and the lungs as the air center. In addition, the readings would suggest, and many clairvoyants agree, that there are energy fields in each of these areas that are invisible to normal sight. These energy fields are parts of the centers, which are present in the mental and spiritual bodies as nerve plexuses and energy fields, work together to create a complex of activity focused in 7 places, which can be symbolized as churches in the body. The teaching in the readings is that these spiritual centers are the transducers between our spiritual nature and our finite physical nature. The soul is able to have a physical effect through these transducers. These centers are always operative, but they are usually in a state of dis-ease or lack of harmony, and thus are not working together for optimum healing and attunement. In meditation, we are seeking to awaken the activities of these centers, not separately, but as a system, so that they function in their highest, most integrative way. 3 Correlate Systems. There are 3 important systems, which are the physiological bases of our experiences in meditation. These 3 have a one-to-one relationship with the 3 levels of mind: conscious, subconscious and superconscious. The first of these systems is the part of the cerebrospinal system that is under our conscious control. This is related especially to the 5 senses and muscular actions, and it corresponds to the physical body and the conscious mind. For example, we use the cortex of our brain and the spinal cord to carry nerve impulses to various muscles when we consciously decide to make some movement. The second system is the autonomic system, which corresponds to the subconscious mind. The autonomic system controls automatic subconscious functioning, for example, your heartbeat, breathing or digestion. The third system is the endocrine system, which has a special relationship to the soul and the superconscious mind. If we are to meditate, we have to make use of that part of the cerebrospinal system that is under our conscious control to make the effort of giving the proper time to meditation. If we are sitting in front of the television, it takes willpower and conscious effort to get up and turn the set off and get ourselves into another room to meditate. This conscious effort is the first step in the physiology of meditation. Probably in the initial part of our meditation periods, we will be using the cerebrospinal system primarily. Under our conscious direction, our body goes through preparatory exercises, and the conscious mind is then focused on an affirmation. When we say effort is required to focus on an affirmation, we don't want to imply that meditation is straining. Instead, the word effort implies the sense of doing it, making it a discipline and directing our conscious will to awaken the joy of doing it each day. If the conscious effort can quiet the outer body, then, through the autonomic system, we are able to attain a stillness and quiet within the body. There is a distinct part of the autonomic nervous system, called the parasympathetic nervous system, that allows the body to relax, to be still and to be quiet. Laboratory research with various forms of meditation has shown that this relaxation, or quieting response takes place naturally as we meditate. As we quiet the sympathetic nervous system and activate the parasympathetic, we awaken processes that are usually inhibited by the frantic and stressful way that we live daily. Once we have attained stillness, the superconscious pattern, which is being awakened by the conscious ideal, can express itself in the form of harmonious and integrated functioning within the endocrine system. A closer look at the spiritual centers. Now let us examine the types of experiences and qualities of consciousness that may be related to each of the spiritual centers. In addition, we shall examine the location and the function of the endocrine gland related to each center. The Gonad Center. The gonads are the endocrine glands that correspond to the first spiritual center. In the male, these are the testes, in the female, the ovaries. This center has to do with our instinct to seek sustenance. In some Eastern schools of thought, this center is referred to as the root chakra. The gonads qualify as endocrine glands by secreting various of the sex hormones. Symbolically, as in dreams, this center and its activities can be represented by the color red, the element earth, and the archetypal symbolic visions of the bull or calf. The cells of Leydig center. Leyden. The second center has to do with our experiences related to the male-female balance within us. From the Bible and the readings we know that as spiritual beings, we are not really male or female. At the level of the soul, there is a oneness and wholeness which, while we are in bodies and in the earth, we are seeking in the seeming opposites. This wholeness may be sought through sexual activity, but it also may be attained by balancing the masculine and feminine qualities. This center is related to the biological instinct for propagation of the species. The cells of Leydig are found within the gonads as interstitial cells. They secrete the sex hormone testosterone, a masculinizing hormone that affects the secondary sexual characteristics and is produced in both sexes. In a corresponding way, some slight production of female hormones takes place in the testes. The cells of Leydig are found in greater number in the testes than in the ovaries, in which they may be referred to as the hyalus cells. This center is represented by the color orange, the element water, and the androgynous man as a symbol. In the Revelation, it corresponds to the Church of Smyrna. The Adrenal Center. The third spiritual center, associated with the adrenal glands, especially relates to our sense of power in the earth and to the instinct for self-preservation. When this center is operating in an integrative fashion with the other centers, it may express itself as courage or persistence, even rarely as righteous indignation. When it is operating in an inharmonious way, we have experiences such as fear or destructive anger. The adrenal glands themselves are most frequently associated with the fight-or-flight instinct. As can be seen in the diagram, the adrenal glands sit just above the kidneys. The inner part of the adrenal is called the medulla, and it secretes two hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline, which are released into the blood when we confront a stressful situation. The outer portion of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal cortex, and it secretes many hormones, sexual hormones, hormones that affect blood sugar level, and hormones that affect the concentration of minerals in the blood. In this same region of the body is a gathering of nerves, the solar plexus. The third spiritual center, therefore, takes in the operation of the adrenal glands, the activities of the solar plexus nerves, and the higher vibrational energy fields located in this area of the body. The color that represents this center is yellow, the element is fire, the symbolic animal is the lion, and the church in the Revelation is Pergamos. The Thymus Center. The fourth spiritual center has largely to do with our experiences related to love in the earth. Thus it is also related to the instinct for self-gratification. Consider such colloquial phrases as broken-hearted and hard-hearted, which reflect activities or experiences of this fourth center. Maternal love would be an example of the highest expression of the center. In the past 15 years, science has begun to understand the thymus gland. It has been found to play a most important role in the body's defense against disease, its immunological system, and is especially concerned with lymphocytes, which make up a part of the white blood cell count. Lymphocytes are manufactured in the thymus, as well as in the lymph nodes, the spleen and areas called Peyer's patches in the abdomen. The thymus can properly be called an endocrine gland because it secretes a hormone that stimulates the production of these lymphocyte cells in the other three areas. As will be noted in the diagram, the thymus has two lobes and is found directly behind the breastbone. It seems to be most active in children and begins to shrink during adolescence. Nevertheless, its functions extend throughout adult life. These first four centers relate particularly to our experiences in the earth. They are often referred to as the four lower centers, lower, in the sense that they are spatially located in the lower part of the body, but also in that they are concerned most frequently with man's survival and expression in the earth. The remaining 3 centers are especially related to the potential for awareness of our divine nature. They form a trinity within ourselves. Thus the thymus is like a balancing point between the lower centers and the upper centers. To the degree that our experiences of love are controlled by the 3 lower centers, that love tends to be selfish, and hence we remain bound to an earthly concept of life. However, if our experiences of love are directed and controlled by the upper 3 centers, we begin to break free of limited concepts of our being. For this reason, the Thymus Center is frequently symbolized by a bird such as the eagle, which is able to soar free of earthly limitations. The thymus can also be symbolized by the color green and the element air, which reflects its location near the lungs. The corresponding church in the Revelation is Thyatira. The Thyroid Center. As a spiritual center, the thyroid relates to the faculty of the will. When it is operating under the direction of the superconscious pattern, the will is made one with divine will, as expressed, for example, in the affirmation, "Not my will, but thine." It also relates to the spirit and may reflect the spirit of obedience, as in Jesus, or the spirit of rebellion. The stubbornness of self-will is described repeatedly in the Bible's references to God's children as a stiff-necked people. Physiologically, this center relates to the thyroid gland, which surrounds the windpipe, as is depicted in the diagram. The hormones secreted by this gland control the metabolism rate in the body, or how fast the body uses energy. When the thyroid is not functioning properly, a person may develop a swelling in that area, called a goiter, as the gland tries to readjust. Some malfunctions of this gland lead to profound depression. Another endocrine gland that is adjacent to the thyroid and often considered to be a part of it is the parathyroid. This gland secretes a hormone that controls the level of calcium in the blood. The color symbolic of the 5th center is blue, or gray, the element is ether, and the church is sardis. The Pineal Center. If we consider the spiritual centers in sequential order, the pineal gland relates to the 6th center, even though spatially it is situated higher in the brain than the pituitary. The pineal center is most often referred to in mystical literature as being the higher mind or the Christ center. Thus it would be related to the experience of light. As the consciousness of this center is awakened, we achieve conscious access to the records and remembrance of everything that we have ever experienced. For those working with the possibilities of reincarnation, it is at this level that past life memories are available. Only in the past decade has science come to understand and acknowledge some of the endocrine functions of the pineal gland. Yet, hundreds of years ago, the philosopher Descartes claimed that the pineal was the seat of the soul. He felt that mysterious strands carried impulses from the eyes to the pineal. The pineal then secreted substances that traveled to the muscles and directed them to make appropriate responses to what was being seen. The theory was quickly dropped by medical science, but it is interesting to note that 1. EDGAR CAYCE suggested that the pineal was closely related to our awareness of ourselves as souls, and 2. Medical science has discovered that the pineal is sensitive to light. It is not sensitive quite as directly as Descartes claimed, rather, the impulse takes a roundabout pathway. Most of the nerve impulses from the eye travel along the optic nerve to various portions of the brain. However, there is one small branch that carries the impulse down through the hypothalamus and into the spinal cord. From there, the nerve impulse travels up to the superior cervical ganglia, and from there it is relayed to the pineal gland. That nerve impulse, which carries information about the light striking the eyes, has a direct effect on the manufacture of a hormone in the pineal. This insight from medical science is significant in at least 2 ways. First, it demonstrates that the only known connection between the nervous system and the 6th spiritual center passes through the neck area. Many people have found a simple head and neck exercise recommended in the readings an effective preparatory activity before meditation. It is possible that in doing this exercise, we are exerting a direct influence upon the pineal gland through these neural connections. A second point, probably more important, relates to the hormone produced by the pineal gland, which is affected by light. This hormone, called melatonin, has been found to have an inhibiting effect upon the hormone secreted by the cells of Leydig, testosterone. This hormonal relationship directly corresponds to the description given in the readings of the movement of energy in meditation. The relationship between the cells of Leydig and the pineal is probably the most important one in the physiology of meditation. The cells of Leydig are a door that may be either sealed or open. The pineal is always the open door. Together they may be said truly to constitute a seat of the soul. In meditation we seek to move the creative energy associated with the cells of Leydig center directly to the pineal center. At that point, the energy is able to take on the qualities of consciousness related to the pineal center, the mind of Christ, and it is then able to overflow into the pituitary and move back down, affecting the functions of the lower centers, healing and integrating our activities. Both the raising and the overflow of the energy may be referred to, as in The Secret of the Golden Flower, as the backward-flowing motion. The color for this sixth center is indigo and the church is Philadelphia, truly the city of brotherly love. The Pituitary Center. The quality of consciousness of this highest center is oneness, the awareness of the oneness of all life. Spiritual healing emanates from this center. Actually, in understanding the function of the pituitary, we must consider an adjacent area called the hypothalamus. Not only is the hypothalamus the master control center of the autonomic nervous system, it has a significant controlling influence on the pituitary as well. The pituitary sits in a bony cup, surrounded on one side by sinus cavities, and just above it is the hypothalamus. The pituitary is made up of two distinct regions, a posterior lobe and an anterior one. The posterior lobe is primarily an extension of nerves from the hypothalamus. At one time it was thought that the posterior lobe synthesized and secreted two hormones, but recently it has been discovered that these hormones are manufactured in the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior lobe of the pituitary before they are released into the bloodstream. The anterior lobe of the pituitary is slightly larger and secretes many different types of hormones, those that control the menstrual cycle, the growth hormone, and hormones that affect the functions of the thyroid and adrenals. Because of its effect on all the other glands, the pituitary has been referred to as the master gland. However, this distinction must be shared with the hypothalamus, because nearly all of the pituitary's hormonal secretions are influenced to some degree by this region of the brain directly above it. The symbolic color for this seventh center is violet and the church is Laodicea. A summary of these concepts related to the seven spiritual centers is shown in the following diagram and chart. Endocrine gland. Symbols. Color. Element. Image. Revelation. Church. 1 gonads red earth bull or calf Ephesus. 2 cells of Leydig orange water androgynous man Smyrna. 3 adrenals yellow fire lion Pergamos. 4 thymus green air eagle Thyatira. 5 thyroid blue ether spirit, holy, Sardis. 6 pineal indigo sun, Christ, Philadelphia. 7 pituitary violet father Laodicea. The two primary functions of the centers as transducers. The spiritual centers as transducers have two primary functions, one of which is illustrated by a helpful analogy from the CAYCE readings. Think of the spiritual aspect of our being as light, the one fundamental energy that is expressing itself in the physical world. Now consider how a slide projector works. It has a bulb which projects light onto a screen. The other essential component, of course, is a slide, the image or pattern, that this light activates and projects onto the screen. This is one way of understanding the relationship between spirit, mind and body. The light of the spirit shines through a pattern of consciousness, and manifests, as a projection, our physical experience. It is also a good analogy for demonstrating how these spiritual centers are both the gatherers of spiritual energy and the storehouses of patterns of consciousness that we have built. These principles can be illustrated by looking at just one of the centers, or transducers. As an example, let us consider the third center, the adrenals. We are all familiar with the way in which this center is called into activity, even if we have not thought of it in just these terms. When it is operating in harmony with the whole system, we may see something like persistence or courage. When it is out of harmony, we are likely to see resentment, anger or fear. Such patterns of behavior, which are like the slides in our analogy, are stored at the various centers, and are very real. They are the habit patterns or reactive tendencies that we have built. In discussing the qualities of consciousness related to the various centers, we have seen that certain types of habit patterns are especially related to particular centers. Depending on the mind's focus of attention, a particular slide or habit pattern from the storehouse of that center is put into a position where it is likely to be the one that will be projected onto the screen as our physical behavior. As the energy of the spirit moves through us in these patterns and gives us life, it manifests as our actions. If we have been dwelling upon angry or resentful thoughts, it is not surprising that we frequently end up behaving that way. What we want to do in meditation is to develop a different way of responding. We want to have the activities of the centers acting together in a harmonious fashion. With our minds, we can remove the slide of resentful or angry patterns from its favored position and replace it with one that is more constructive. When we do this, we become truly different people. We begin to experience a kind of health that we have never known before. We begin to know a kind of joy and excitement in life that will give us a new sense of purposefulness. This is one thing that is taking place in meditation. By dwelling upon spiritually awakening affirmations, we are selecting new patterns, that is, patterns that are there already, but usually do not get chosen. Then we are inviting the energy of the spirit to move through these spiritual centers to activate a creative, harmonious pattern for the body and the mind. This is one function of the spiritual center. The other function is related to the phrase opening a center. Some people who refer to this process indicate that by following a certain meditation procedure, they are able to open their spiritual centers. To open these centers means to modify the barrier between the infinite and the finite aspects of ourselves. Certainly, we are all seeking to lessen these barriers. However, how we go about doing so is of critical importance. The opening of the centers may be the normal accompaniment of deep meditation, or it may be brought about intentionally or accidentally by such stimuli as drugs, breathing exercises, certain yogic postures, mantras, incense, various religious rituals, for example, the dance of the whirling dervishes, or even physical disorders, such as spinal lesions. The center works to control the flow of energy. The more energy that is flowing through the transducer, the more intense will be the experience. As the center begins to open, more of the life force can begin to manifest through it into physical expression. Yet the intensity of an experience does not necessarily indicate the extent of spiritual growth. In fact, one possible explanation for the mind and experience-altering properties of that hallucinogenic drugs is that they have an effect on the spiritual centers, sometimes blowing them open. When some or all of the centers are opened, a significantly greater amount of energy is able to flow through, and very intense experiences are the result. The problem is that the patterns or slides within those centers are not changed by simply taking a drug. We may very well intensify the experience of patterns that will only take us even deeper into a sense of confusion. In the interpretation of the revelation, which the readings offer, we find a clue as to the proper way to open the centers. It is suggested that the book with the 7 seals represents the body with its 7 centers. You will recall that John cries when he realizes that no one is worthy to open those seals. Then the Lamb appears, symbolic of the Christ, and it opens the seals. It is the Spirit of the Christ that should open the spiritual centers of the body. Here we are being taught to meditate upon the Christ as an ideal, and to invite him into our lives. And then, as we work with expressing the qualities of Christ in the earth, as we live the life of love, these centers begin to open naturally. In this way, intense experiences come only as we are able to use them for our own growth. To optimize our own growth, it is better to allow the centers to open naturally through the action of the Spirit, as we work with meditation and apply what we know in daily life. The movement of energy in meditation. The spiritual centers serve as transducers throughout our daily activities. In meditation we seek to redirect the way in which the energy flows through these centers. As was mentioned earlier, our aim is to move the creative energy associated with the Adrenal Center directly to the Pineal Center. This movement, which in the East is referred to as the Kundalini, is described in the following reading. It is apparent from this description that as the energy moves upward it takes its impulse from the Adrenal Center. Are the following statements true or false? Comment on each as I read it. The life force rises directly from the Thyroid Gland through the gonads, thence to pineal, and then to the other centers. This is correct, though, to be sure, as it rises and is distributed through the other centers it returns to the solar plexus area for its impulse through the system. In the following passage from the readings, this Kundalini pathway is referred to as the silver cord, which connects the cells of Leydig, or Leiden, with the activities of the pineal and pituitary. In the body we find that which connects the pineal, the pituitary, the Leiden, may be truly called the silver cord, or the golden cup that may be filled with a closer walk with that, which is the creative essence in physical, mental and spiritual life. This awakening of energy during meditation takes place not only in the endocrine glands, but also throughout the entire nervous system. The following passage is in agreement with research into the physiology of meditation, which indicates that the nervous system responds in a beneficial way during meditation. How can I overcome the nerve strain I'm under at times? By closing the eyes and meditating from within, so that there arises, through that of the nerve system, that necessary element that makes along the pineal. Don't forget that this runs from the toes to the crown of the head, that will quiet the whole nerve forces, making for that, as has been given, as the true bread, the true strength of life itself. Quiet, meditation, for a half to a minute, will bring strength. Will the body see physically this flowing out to quiet self, whether walking, standing still, or resting? Well, too, that oft when alone meditate in the silence, as the body has done. This movement of energy throughout the body during meditation is experienced by different people in different ways. Some feel a slight pressure in the area of one of the spiritual centers, such as the heart region, or the middle of the forehead. Some people feel tingling in certain parts of the body, such as the spine. Occasionally this experience is felt as two different energies, one moving upward from the base of the spine, the Kundalini pathway, and the other, like the Pentecostal flames of the Holy Spirit, moving downward and touching the body in the region of the head. These two seemingly highly divergent experiences actually relate to the two poles within the body through which the one energy may flow. As an illustration of the extremes of the ways in which the life force may flow between the two poles within, consider an automobile battery as an energy source. If a wrench is placed across the two poles, it will be melted by the direct flow of energy. If, on the other hand, the lead wires of an FM radio are placed on the two poles of the battery, the radio may pick up waves broadcast from a distant source and translate and amplify them into beautiful symphonic music. The energy is the same, The difference is in the complexity and order of the form, that is to say, the pattern, in which it flows. The selection of the pattern is very dependent upon the motives held in the imaginative force of the mind. There is within each of us a universal pattern, the law of love, the Christ pattern.